Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. More drama over at Red Bull with another senior departure from their organisation just months after they lost Adrian Newey, a few weeks after they lost Jonathan Wheatley, among others over the last couple of years. Another senior departure again after the reign of Christian Horner does not seem to be going especially well over these last 6 or so months. McLaren are the team looking to get this senior individual. Are they building a serious powerhouse as Ferrari are looking to over the coming years? Lots to dive into today. Very much interested to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. First of all, there's still some questions right now on Daniel Ricciardo because we know that he said goodbye to the paddock. He didn't want to leave the paddock. Everyone in the paddock, including his own team, seems to be convinced that he's going to go. But Red Bull Racing, RB, VCarb, they've still not said anything about whether Ricciardo is actually going to stay or whether he's going to go. We're pretty sure though that Lawson is going to get the drive, probably from Austin and onwards. It's also worthy of consideration, right, that he was meant to be joining Lawson Williams, or at least that's what Williams wanted. They wanted Lawson, that's what James Vowles was trying to get, but RB said no, we want the option to bring Lawson into our car whenever we like. And maybe we can read between the lines there to say, well, they were kind of expecting and predicting and, well, basically planning for Lawson to come in here for Ricciardo. So still no official confirmation, but it seems like Ricciardo and the team have kind of accepted that is going to be the reality. And of course, because Lawson didn't get the drive at Williams, that means that Colapinto did. And he is one of 3 options that Audi are seriously considering for next year alongside Nico Hülkenberg. There were rumours that the Bottas deal is done, and it actually seems like Bottas is probably the more likely of the options here. But Gabriele Bortoleto, McLaren junior driver, leading, I think, the F2 Championship. He's been pretty damn impressive in the junior formulas over the last couple of years. And there's nothing that potentially says that Bortoleto couldn't do in Formula 1 what Colapinto is presently doing, but Colapinto is actually doing it, and that's what makes this quite interesting. Colapinto was not on the radar of anyone a couple of months ago, apart from Williams, who knew he was pretty quick. They had him in their simulator, he was pretty close to Alex Albon, and when the Lawson thing didn't happen, then James Vowles had a relatively easy decision to give the drive to Colapinto. That's proven to be very successful so far. He's done an excellent job. Even that big send into turn 1 in Singapore, which many drivers didn't like, you know, he pulled it off. He went for the gap, he made the move, and it was a successful one of that. I think he even had like stomach pains or whatever during the Grand Prix and still finished a very respectable P11. Of course, 1 crash up front, and that's a very different story as it was back in Baku. So, you know, Colapinto has done a very impressive job, and there are some drivers, maybe Colapinto included, who do not have the most impressive rookie, you know, junior careers, shall we say, in other Formula Series. Obviously, Colapinto had been impressive, but it's not like he was standing out as, you know, Antonelli maybe was in his junior career, of course, joining Mercedes next year, but he's one of those drivers who's, you know, taken to Formula 1 like a duck to water, and Bortoleto, of course, will be confident he could do the same thing, but it's just one of these right place, right time moments, isn't it, where Colapinto is actually doing the thing, and he's going to have another few races to get to do so in the Williams, and therefore Sauber would be potentially well within their right to say, well, you know, Colapinto's not our man, he's Williams' man, but Bortoleto's not our man, he's McLaren's man. So, you know, intrigued to your thoughts on who should actually get that drive next year. Of course, it was, at least at Williams, Logan Sargent's drive. He is going to be testing an IndyCar, so there's been a rumour there that Sargent, maybe even to Primo, was a consideration in their IndyCar project they are starting up. I wonder where Danny Rick might go as well. Would he consider NASCAR, supercars, maybe even IndyCar like Grosjean has done, like Ericsson have done over the last couple of years, and seemingly potentially how Sargent may well go on to do. Covered a bit of drama over at Mercedes. This is very interesting, right? So Hamilton and Russell missed, if you guys remember it, the media session after the Singapore Grand Prix because they were overheating. According to Toto Wolff, he actually said this after the Grand Prix, that they were borderline suffering from heat stroke after the race. Now, we know the Singapore Grand Prix is a tough one. Historically, it's a long race, right? Because it's relatively slow track, only like a 3-mile circuit or whatever it is. And there's plenty of laps to be driven. It's, you know, near enough a 2-hour race. Relatively often, certainly was with, you know, the previous final sector as it used to be. Hot conditions, humid conditions, tricky for the drivers, one of the most physically grueling races on the calendar. In addition to the fact that that Mercedes has, it seems, had problems with the seat overheating, right? I mean, Hamilton talked about this, Russell has talked about this, the cockpit, the heat in the cockpit for some reason getting really hot, and especially in Singapore, that's been a problem. And this was Russell after the race. He looks absolutely dead. So you know, I think it's sensible to assume that Toto was probably correct that his drivers were suffering bad and therefore they skipped the press conference. There was a bit of drama about this actually, because Lando was asked about this on stream. He was at least chatting to someone playing iRacing or whatever this is. I'm pretty sure it's that. And Norris basically says, like, it was tough for everyone. You know, it's not just those guys that were struggling. And Norris was like, well, we're all kind of suffering from it, right? So, you know, it's just one of these things where Lando, at times he can be likable, at times he rubs people up the wrong way. You know, look, the reality is he's in a title fight and he's going to try and give it his best shot. But Hamilton, by not being in that media session, didn't get to comment on the Mercedes strategy choice. And even after a couple of days to mull over it and comment on it in the way that he wants to, he was still very angry about their decision to start him on the soft tyre, because I think he felt like a podium was possible had they not butchered his strategy. And he says, I was so perplexed by the idea to start on softs, it didn't make sense to me, so I battled as hard as I could to fight to go on the medium tyre. So he battled against his own team. He was telling the strategy guys, no, I think the medium's the right tyre, because the medium was clearly the race tyre. And always with a medium tyre, it gives you the option, as let's say Piastri did, to go really deep into the race, just in case there's a safety car. And there wasn't on this occasion, but the option to go deep on, 30 odd laps on a set of mediums before switching to the hards or whatever you want to do, that option is there on the medium tyres. It's not really there on the soft tyres. And, it can potentially give you an advantage on strategy. Sure, Mercedes say, well, we thought we were faster than we were. We thought Lewis maybe on the soft to be able to challenge Max and Lando up ahead. Potentially that would give us an edge at some point. But, there's a debate on whether that even made any sense in the first place. I don't especially think that it did. Hamilton doesn't think that it did. And he said, yeah, I battled against the team to try and go on the mediums. The team continued to tell me that I've got to start on the softs. When they took the tyre blankets off, everyone else was on the medium tyres. George Russell says, when I saw that, I was thinking that Lewis won't be happy about it. And Hamilton was like, yeah, I was so angry. Already from that moment, I was frustrated. And of course, that kind of compounded into a challenging afternoon, evening, to say the very least. So people are obviously commenting on this, saying like, is this just another bad strategy call from Merc? Is this like deliberate sabotage to give him a superior or an inferior strategy to Russell, to allow Russell to get the eventual overcut on him because Hamilton had to pit into traffic? He was taking life out of his hard tyres, and it just wasn't well executed again. The reality is, whatever the case is on this situation, he's joining Ferrari, and I'm sure that Hamilton is looking more and more forward to that every single Grand Prix. And yes, Ferrari, strategically, operationally, they still have their problems. It's been better, I would say, under Vasseur for sure. They've, let's say Monza, strategy masterclass, to win that Grand Prix over McLaren, although you might argue it was McLaren's mistake. Whatever, the results speak for themselves. And I'm sure that Hamilton, in the middle of the season, given the way that Mercedes and Ferrari were trending, Hamilton was not exactly second-guessing his decision, but he was thinking, well, was this the right call, maybe or not? Because Ferrari were regressing, Mercedes were on the up, they'd won 3 out of 4 races. Clearly, as it stands, Hamilton, it seems, has made the right decision here. And, week after week, there are things that go wrong at Mercedes that make me very confident that Hamilton has again made the right call. This was also reported today in the Italian press that he's currently undergoing Italian lessons, which will ease his integration into the Ferrari system. And this is funny, right? This is a quote, I imagine, translated from the Italian. I find it hilarious how the Italian press describe things sometimes. He is even mastering the language in its most complex form, such as learning the expressions which will allow for closer bonds to the personnel within the team. But let's talk about the battling actually going on at the front of the grid right now, not involving these two cars, but actually involving McLaren and Red Bull, because as Christian Horner says, we're going to battle all the way until the end of the championship, and it's absolutely plausible that it does really go down to the wire. I think everyone knows the constructors' fight is over for Red Bull. It's actually more likely right now that they potentially lose out to Ferrari. I mean, as it stands, Ferrari again executed a good weekends in Singapore in terms of the race day. Obviously, qualifying was a disaster class, especially with the tyre blanket situation, of course, for Charles Leclerc. But nonetheless, Ferrari are closing in. Red Bull Racing's securing second place in the championship in the constructors is absolutely not guaranteed at all. But Max is still looking pretty damn likely to hold on to the Drivers' Championship. But it is pretty likely to go down to the wire. It still does take me back to, especially the Hungarian Grand Prix. the community, I would say, is still very split on what was the correct decision, whether McLaren, as they did, effectively force and blackmail, really, Lando and gaslight Lando into changing positions back with Piastri and giving him the victory there. And of course, it was McLaren's mistake allowing Norris to undercut him in the first place. But look, the reality is that cost Lando a handful of points. There's been probably 10, 12 points this season that McLaren could have chosen to change around. And if the championship lead for Max was 40 points rather than 52, that would sound drastically different with 6 races left on the cards. And of course, it could have been 51 if not for Danny Rick the other day. But this is another big news of the day, really, with Red Bull again losing senior staff. You guys remember when Zach Brown a few months ago, especially with the Horner stuff going on, said that he'd seen CVs flying around left, right and centre from senior staff at Red Bull. Even we know Gianpiero Lambiase, of course, race engineer for Max Verstappen, he was targeted by McLaren. He was targeted, I think, even by Ferrari, especially given that people are gettable right now from Red Bull. They really are. And it seems like Red Bull said, all right, GP will give you a bit more cash or will give you a promotion, which he's getting, and therefore you'll keep him around. But some others, that's not possible for. For example, Chief Strategist Will Courtenay, who has been, the head of strategy. Of course, Hannah Schmidt, you'll know, is, I think, the principal strategy engineer for the team, and she gets lots of the credit. But actually, the head of their whole strategy perspective is this guy, Courtenay. And we know that for the last few years, Red Bull have had basically impeccable strategies. So at least on paper, this is a pretty big loss. And not only is he leaving Red Bull, but he is joining McLaren to become their sporting director. So yeah, McLaren, Aston Martin, Ferrari, they are all trying to form the Avengers right now, and Red Bull are losing just so many senior staff over the last several months. So yeah, Will Courtenay is coming in as the sporting director for McLaren, and yeah, head of race strategy at Red Bull, one of their massive strengths over the last several years, really, who's going to be departing Red Bull again. So look, on paper, it's a pretty big loss. The actual impact, of course, is a matter for debate, but it's not necessarily about the impact of every single individual leaving. It's more so, what's it like as a collective, right? Newey leaving, that's a massive deal because it's Adrian Newey. Jonathan Wheatley leaving, that's a big deal. Obviously, their sporting director, he's now going to go to Audi to become their team principal. Will Courtenay's out the door as well. Rob Marshall, top engineer over there, he left for McLaren not long ago. Dan Fallows, he left for Aston Martin not long ago, another top engineer over there. So it's not necessarily each individual, it's more so the collective feeling. And we know that this is a thing, right? When teams dominate for some time, there's always going to be an inevitable brain drain. The team gets to the top, they get offers from other teams, some of them are going to leave, it's going to affect the quality of the organisation, things are going to start to go downhill, and therefore more and more people want to leave because things are starting to decline. For example, maybe this guy Courtenay saw Newey depart, he saw Wheatley depart, he's seen obviously what happened with the Horner situation earlier in the year and said, all right, maybe now is the time to field other options, get a promotion to go and join a different team for probably more money, why not? And now is the perfect time to do so. It does obviously make you have maybe somewhat more respect in a way for what Toto Wolff and Mercedes were able to achieve, because yes, Mercedes did have their decline. 2022, the last couple of years have not been as good at all, and they lost loads of staff in that time frame, but Mercedes were still able to win all of those championships in a row, even with, suffering from the problem that Red Bull are suffering with right now. So it seems like, McLaren's or Red Bull's reign of dominance, as it were, is going to last for a significantly shorter time than we saw with Mercedes, and this is potentially another reason why. One detail, though, is that Red Bull are going to have him locked down to a contract for a long time. Probably shows on some level why. Firstly, they're not going to help McLaren if they can afford not to, but equally, they probably think he's pretty damn valuable because they've got him under gardening leave for basically 2 years. Like, this guy's going to get paid full salary, or something very close to, I'd imagine, on this gardening leave, to do basically nothing for the next 2 seasons. So he can go off and chill and do whatever he wants and, enjoy himself for the next 24 months or so until then his gardening leave ends. So it does show that Red Bull are willing to kind of feel that pain to prevent McLaren getting the benefits immediately because, they are probably understandably expecting McLaren to be a serious contender over the next couple of years. But look, that adds to another list. Of course, we talked about Marshall, we talked about Wheatley, we've talked about Newey, and that's just over the last couple of months that they've lost. I mean, Chief Technical Officer, Sporting Director, Head of Strategy. Like, these aren't insignificant roles in the team. So it just shows that the situation under Christian Horner is not exactly ideal, and probably in a few months' time it's going to be Christian Horner, it's going to be Helmut Marko, and it's going to be Max Verstappen left in the team. Maybe Max won't be there for too much longer either. The key thing that will determine that, though, is how good the car is, because if next year Red Bull don't have an especially competitive car, Max is out of there. No doubt about it in my mind. Horner, though, and Red Bull will try and fix things over the summer break. Well, it's actually not the summer break. We're past the summer break now, but it still kind of feels like it, doesn't it? Because it's another 3-week gap, and as Horner says, the gap is big, but he doesn't mean the gap as in between Singapore and Austin. He means the gap from Red Bull to McLaren, because, I mean, Lando was dunking 9/10 a lap on Max's head in the first stint at Singapore. Like, it's absurd how efficient they were there. The same thing happened back in Zandvoort. Like, there's no reason why Lando, if he executes, can't just win every race. And the Red Bull needs to get better, because if the Red Bull stays as good as it's been over the last few rounds, Max can get the car to second, Max can get the car to third, or to fourth, or to fifth, depending on the day and how good the car is, but he's not going to be able to either win, or he's not going to be able to take points out of Lando or really defend himself that much, especially when Perez is nowhere to be found on most occasions. So Horner does say, we've understood our problems, we're well on the way to solving them, there'll be many long nights in Milton Keynes to get that straight. We have to admit McLaren is the new benchmark. So Red Bull are saying, we get it, we know why we're so far behind, we're now going to get to work on fixing the deficit. But the deficit in Singapore was substantial, as to be fair, we expected it to be. Austin, it shouldn't be as big, especially if they have a major upgrade, but it's not just Red Bull that are bringing upgrades. McLaren have work as well, and they are, McLaren are also in a title fight for the driver's side too. They are also working on upgrade packages to try and, take things around, and as people are saying, it's arguably the most important race. If Red Bull turn up with an upgrade that works, Max is probably going to hold on. If Red Bull turn up with an upgrade that doesn't work, Lando's well in position, especially if they bring an upgrade. It's also worthy to remember, McLaren have a floor that they've readied that will generate more downforce, but they're not sure they want to use it because the other teams that used their new floors suffered balance problems as a result, and I don't think McLaren need the new floor. I mean, the performance delta, as I said, that Lando had in Singapore was so insane in the race pace that if they can maintain half of that gap in the remaining rounds with good reliability, then they should be in a position to still close up on Max's championship lead. To enter into your thoughts on a comment, I definitely still see a world where in the coming years it is McLaren versus Ferrari again in the championship battles, and even there's talk here from Giuliano de Kessa that Ferrari are forming a French-speaking triad in power, as in Jerome D'Ambrosio, Loic Serra, both formerly of Mercedes, and then of course Fred Vasseur, who also speaks a fair bit of French if he goes unaware of that. So very much interested in your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.